As healthcare practitioners, whether you're in management or on the front line, we can all benefit from a little bit of out-of-the-box thinking. That's why we're speaking to Glenn Capelli. He's sharing with us some tips about how we can be a little bit more creative and come up with ideas that are going to work for better outcomes for the people we're working with. Today we're lucky enough to be speaking to thinking and learning expert Glenn Capelli. Glenn, thank you so much for speaking with us today.
Pleasure.
So Glenn, can you tell me a little bit about, you've got this new book called Thinking Caps. Can you tell me how that originated and what's it about?
The craziness of my life. I wouldn't recommend this, but I did, in 35 days I had 34 presentations in 14 countries, and as part of it all I'd be writing emails back to my wife Lindy, and I was in Japan and I wrote an email about Japanese toilets because they're fascinating. But then the sorrow of my favourite pair of underpants gave up the ghost. They broke whilst I was presenting, and they're blue, and when you travel alone a lot, inanimate objects, you give them names. So it was Bluey, my favourite jocks, just died, and I had to leave them in a Tokyo bin. And I wrote to my wife Lindy about the sorrow of this, and she wrote back saying, "That's the funniest thing you've ever written." And I had to write back and explain it wasn't comedy, it was tragedy. So when I got back to Australia, I was running a session for radio about generating ideas for radio programs, and I said, imagine you had to use this piece. And I read my little email out to them about Bluey, my underwear. And Rosemary Greenham, the ABC producer, came up and said, we want to use that. And subsequently, for the next 3 years, my little Thinking Caps pieces were airing on ABC radio, and 40 of them made their way into the book. And they're little slices of life, you know, looking at life maybe slightly differently. And they educate sideways. People are laughing, but then some learning just slips in.
I listened to them when I was running the other day, and I think everyone must have thought I was going crazy, because half the time I'm thinking about something, what does that mean to me? And half the time I'm just laughing, I'm almost in tears. So it works.
Well, it's the beauty of it. We had somebody who was reading the book on a plane, and they said they were in tears, crying, not from laughter, but from some of the message. Yeah. And then laughing out loud at the very same time. And I think that's beautiful. If we can get people to think and laugh. And laughter is a nice little way to dissolve the brain, to open it up, and then suddenly maybe we can think a little bit more expansively, a little bit differently.
And sometimes as health professionals, we are talking about things that can be difficult for people. How do we generate ideas that, you know, like you do, get those messages out there, but, you know, how do you do that?
Well, any concept has to be made conceptual, it has to be made real to people. So if you're introducing a concept, you've got to make it contextual to their life. Yep. So if I'm teaching something about diversity of learning style and global and analytical learners, well, that for some people is, oh yes, and others it's like, what the hell does that mean? So I'll talk about Lindy and I and how we open cereal boxes differently. You know, how Lindy will methodically go through process and I'll rip the top off kind of thing. And the analytical's got the attention to detail, global's just, let me get to the thing very quickly. So if you can make something that's abstract or conceptual, contextual to people's lives, so that means we need to make stuff as real as possible. And in nutrition and in health, I mean, one of the dangers, and my mate Glenn Cardwell, who you know well, that great dietitian, nutritionist, odd man. I love oddity. And we talk about Chumbawamba. And Chumbawamba is when you think in layers and mixes and blends. And so often in life we're looking for the one single answer. We're looking for the one thing, the one diet, the one this, the one that.
And everyone asks us, what's the best of this? What do I have to do for this?
And it's usually not the one thing, as you guys know. It's usually a little bit of this mixed with a little bit of that and a little bit of that. And it's a mixture and a blend of things. And when people understand that, then they go, okay, so I need to do a bit more of this and a little bit less of this, and I need to get rid of that, and I need to add this into the brew. But so often, for the human mind, it's more about, oh no, I just want the one thing. Yeah. And we've got to almost teach people, train people to think in blends and mixes and partial answers and partial solutions. And what is absolutely correct for you may not be absolutely correct for me.
And so can we do that with using things like evidence-based medicine and adding in things from other industries or ideas to make it more palatable for people? Or how do you suggest we get around that? Like we have to use a certain way to do things because it's based on evidence, but how do we make it a bit more interesting, do you think?
I think the evidence is great. I mean, because evidence is real. That's part of the nitty-gritty. And if we've got some of the statistics or some of the data or some of the evidence, what we need to do for any information is then, okay, so let's put it into a story. A real story. Story, point, link. I mean, Dale Carnegie started his business in 1912. Tell a story that makes a point that links to the theme you're on about. Doesn't dumb it down. And then when people have got the concept, have got the story, have got the understanding, then go to the layers. But too often what we do is we go to the detail first. Detail, 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 detail. And most learners need the bigger picture first, some understanding of the general concept and how it relates to them or their kids or their life, and then, okay, what can we do about this now? Here's another layer, here's another layer, here's another layer, so you get them to travel to some depth with the information.
So we have to think about it a bit more than just take it for granted of the information we've been given.
We've got to also honour the fact that different folks, different strokes and different ways of learning. You know, it's so often if we're rich with detail and rich with analytical and rich with, you know...
Which we usually are as health professionals.
Financial conference recently, and they're going, okay, here's a slide, and it said, oh, it's a very busy slide, you know, it's got all this information on it, it's got all these... And it said, the print's so small you in the back row won't be able to see it. In fact, you in the front row won't be able to see it. I'm thinking, well, why do you have all that? Why do you have it up there? You know, give it to people in a different way so it can make sense, and then go to the layers and the depth of it. But what we usually do in a tertiary education institution is we go to the label and we go to the detail first. But if you got to... Some people just don't know stuff, so often we're making assumptions that they've got a lot of prior knowledge. Come into the level that makes sense, try to teach it so it makes sense to a 7-year-old, so it makes sense to a 17-year-old, so it makes sense to an adult, so it would make sense to an expert in the field. But start by getting it to make sense to the 7-year-old.
And I like how you said before that we don't have to dumb it down, we just create stories that match those age groups. Is that what you mean?
Layers and layers and layers. And not just stories, but the ways of, if you're teaching a concept to a 7-year-old, say for example, we have Kaizen that we might teach in corporations, the Japanese concept of attention to detail. It's a gentle, graceful approach of ongoing correction. But to a 7-year-old, that doesn't mean much. But in sign language, it's a little bit, a little bit, a little bit, a little bit of improvement every day. And then if you put it into song, Kaizen is original tune, little bit, little bit, little. So it's got these 7-year-olds doing the sign language, doing the song of it all, and then they know that Kaizen is a tiny little improvement. And if they get to celebrate those. Now the interesting thing is that, yes, that might help a 7-year-old, but it also happens to help a lot of people in organisations go, oh, that's what it's about.
Yeah, we sometimes take that for granted. We assume people want to hear things that are, you know, really big words, lots of statistics, but sometimes we just need to connect with them a little bit more maybe.
Yeah, make them come alive, and through discovery. So instead of just telling, it's like, okay, what might this mean to you? Imagine this scenario, have a chat with your buddies about this. Okay, now I'll give you some detail about this. So the discovery awakens the curiosity, and then you travel to the label. The discovery process engages the global learner, the bigger picture curious learner. Travelling to the label engages the analytical. So you've got to do both, you've got to do it all. But too often educators, I think, just go straight in, here's the detail, boom, 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 boom.
So usually we try and do presentations and sitting with clients, talking to them like they're us. So how do we know if they're analytical or kinesthetic or what their learning style is, or do we just have to try and meet all of them?
Some learners are blended learners, and all styles suit. But it's also interesting just to ask people, how would you like this information?
How novel!
Well, what we used to do, I mean, for the first 7 years in the business, we were running a youth program. So we'd work with youngsters and their parents, and self-esteem based, learning based. And I would show them my journal. And for example, the notes at this conference that we're at, you know, my journal opens up and it's pictures and colour plus words. And to some people, it's just a mess on a page. but to other people it excites their brain. So if I've got a youngster in front of me, so just have a look at this, and they look at it, and if some go, oh wow, look at that. It's like, okay, so what do you find interesting about this? Well, I find the colour interesting, or I find the pictures, or what draws your attention, or somebody else is like, no, that's just a mess. I need it linear. And so by looking at it, then they're giving us an indication. Or I'd say to the youngsters, I'm going to give you some things to remember: an orange, a chair, a basketball, and I might carry on for 10 things. Then I say, no, just close your eyes or keep them open if you prefer. What ones can you remember? And I say, oh, an orange, a chair, a basketball. And I say, well, how did you do that? Well, what do you mean? I said, well, what happened in your head? Well, I saw them. You saw them? And they will think that everybody sees them, but not everybody does. So suddenly if they're telling you that they're getting the picture, then it means that there's something visual going on inside their brain, which means that's an approach to take. If they're not getting a picture, and there's other where they're saying to, ball, or chair, or whatever to remember it, then there's a different approach they're taking. So the key is, I think, in the opening minutes with people, unearth them through a genuine curiosity in how they process, but never assuming that how we process is going to be the way that others do.
Great. So Glenn, you speak to audiences around the world. You're a CSP and a wonderful speaker. You speak to health industry and health professionals. If you could give us 3 pieces of advice, whether it be in learning or creating ideas, what would those be? 3 little pearls of wisdom.
Oh, pearls of wisdom for health professionals. First, we know how important that the work is that you guys do, but that doesn't mean that everybody does. So find a way to make your work and your details and the things you're excited about as exciting to other human beings. 2, find a way to make it real. So I again go back to, how would it make sense to the 7-year-old? How would it make sense? And you might not be presenting the information to 7-year-olds, but if you give yourself that restriction, imagine I had to make this come alive to a 7-year-old's mind, what methodologies would I use? It will help you to reach others. And then I think sometimes too, the brain learns by suggestion, and we often are giving, oh, you've got to do this, we're telling. But slipping little things in sideways through tiny little anecdotes about what happened to this person or that person, or this happened in my life or that, which means have that ongoing curiosity. There's a piece in the thinking caps about scratching. Where do you scratch for ideas? And once you've scratched for ideas in other places, different places than what other people are looking, and then catch those ideas and then hatch them, give birth to ideas in a whole diversity of ways, through story, through song, through dance, through physical movement. And every health professional is an educator, and educators have got to honour that diversity of human beings.
Glenn, thank you so much for your time.
My joy, my pleasure. Thank you.
So you can see when we're trying to get our message out, marketing health, there's some great learning that we can take from Glenn Capelli about learning and thinking a little bit differently. Glenn Capelli, author of Thinking Caps. Glenn, thank you so much for speaking with us.
Thank you.